You and I with Rashmi Shetty is a human library audio podcast bringing in stories of people you and I can draw inspiration from. Welcome to the third season of this amazing story listening journey. Ordinary folks, extraordinary lives, their uniqueness and individuality, making them interesting to talk to and to listen to. Each one of them completely connected to the voice in me and with motivational stories of moving beyond themselves to make a difference in the world. A reaffirmation of the fact: open your eyes wider. The world is far more beautiful when we acknowledge the presence of both you and I. Our guest today is Ben Gioia. Thanks to the Influence with a Heart method, Ben's clients write great books in as little as 5 weeks. They enjoy a 5-figure speaking fees and attract 6-figure consulting. He's the only book coach who starts the writing process with a proven strategic business development that attracts revenue. Ben teaches consultants, coaches, leaders, speakers, and small business owners on how to make 6 or 7 figures without selling a single book. A 4-time international bestseller, podcast and radio host, Ben's teachings are used by more than 80,000 people. He has trained hundreds of millionaires at Stanford, helped a Fortune 100 create a mindfulness and empathy video game for 20,000 employees, and launched the world's largest magazine, AARP. Ben started writing when he was 12 and has won a Patient Services Award from the ALS Association. Listen in as Ben shares his inspirational journey and his magical trip to India and what he got out of it. Hi, Ben. Such a pleasure and joy to have you on You and I with Rashmi Shetty. I have connected with you on LinkedIn, and your journey seems fascinating. To know what Ben is and how Ben's journey is to who Ben Gioia the world knows you today as, let's start from little Ben. What were you like as a little boy? Where were you brought up, and what was your journey so far?
Yeah, thank you. So, Rashmi, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for asking me to share my story with you and with your listeners and viewers. It's really an honor and a pleasure. I'd actually like to start the childhood story with a story of before I was born, about my grandfather, because my grandfather fought in World War II. He was in a tank, actually in combat, and the tank was hit by a mortar or a shell or something, and was almost destroyed, and several of his of the other soldiers in the tank were killed, and he was badly injured. He tried to get out of the tank and he couldn't get out of the tank, right? He got himself kind of up through the opening at the top and just couldn't get any further. One of the soldiers that he was with was able to actually pull him out and get him away to safety. So thanks to this other gentleman, I believe his name is Harry Milk, if I'm remembering correctly. Thanks to him, I'm here today, right? Because if my grandfather hadn't made it, right, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So it's fascinating, right? It's not just our own history, but it's the history of all of our ancestors and all of the people who touch our lives. Really incredible.
But it's fascinating also that this is the first time somebody shared a story or a bit about before they came into the world. And where are you originally from, Ben? And how was your childhood? Where was it, and where were you brought up?
Yeah, thank you. So I was born in New York in the US, born in Brooklyn and grew up in Queens. And my parents did not plan to have me. I was a surprise to them. They welcomed the surprise, which was wonderful, and brought me up. And yeah, I had the experience when I was very young, my parents separating before I was 1 year old. So lived the first, I guess, 6 or 7 years of my life, primarily with my mother, and then some of her extended family my grandparents, my aforementioned grandfather, as well as several of my mom's siblings. So it was interesting because even though I didn't have both of my parents, I had a little bit of the village taking care of me, so to speak. So that was a real blessing to me. And something that stands out tremendously from my childhood is that we moved quite a bit, right? We moved from New York to Florida, and then we moved back to New York and back to Florida, and then back to New York. Some of it was for reasons of employment for my mom. She was a teacher, and there was a teacher's strike in New York at that time, and not just a strike, but several problems. So she had to find some alternate employment. Going back and forth, on the one hand, was stressful, right? Because I was leaving friends and leaving my regular environment, but it also gave me the taste for travel. And there's something that as soon as I start moving, I feel a bit of ease. So even if there's that tension of, oh, I'm leaving somewhere, and there's some nervousness around that, there's also the comfort of the actual movement. And to this day, even if I just step outside and hop on a bus, I feel that ease of that movement happening.
Normally people feel good when you come into a comfort of home and you sit in there. And this is interesting to see that travel gives you ease. And did this shift from place to place somewhere also make you more alert to your surroundings and what's happening around you to try and fit in or to stand out?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I think it did both. There's definitely some how do I fit in and how do I adapt quickly. And I think the standing out, it wasn't that I was trying to stand out per se. I think I always just felt like an outsider, right? That was something that I understood very early in my life for myself. And it's not that people weren't welcoming or kind, but there was just that, the wisdom that children have, which is vast, right? I was picking up on something that, wow, I don't quite fit here. And it wasn't judgmental about the people around me, but there was just some kind of unease that I think that has been there, gosh, for many decades, and it took quite a while to finally go, okay, I think I'm good, right? And there are still some times that I do still feel like I don't completely belong. I'm not sure if I've come from another planet. I mean, and I say that half jokingly because I don't, who knows, right? The universe is a lot bigger and more complex than we can possibly imagine or possibly even conceive of.
That's true. That's true. And they say life is one university that all of us graduate only when we leave the planet and move on. Your learning from this planet and this university has been vast. You said that you still don't feel sometimes very settled. So, what were those moments in your growing up years, and what did you study which made you ask most of these questions? Because I'm very curious to know what were the influences on subjects taught in school that led to who you are today.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I think some of it, well, a big part of it was 12 years of Catholic school. And while the education was wonderful in my experience, like I learned a lot of things. I learned how to think and how to figure things out. And I got a lot of the skills that I needed to be an entrepreneur, which I figured out about 30 years later. Right. But what I really struggled with was a lot of the rules of Catholic school and the restrictions that I was feeling as a child, and wearing a uniform and wearing a tie, and that the that there was love and care from the teachers, but there was also a bit of fear and terror in the mix. Right. And it wasn't just the teachers, right? But it was the whole presentation of the Bible and much of the Catholic experience, and how this iconic being, right, Jesus Christ, who's an amazing dude, right? I'm a big fan of Jesus Christ, but the representation of Jesus Christ on the cross, right, this great amount of suffering, it never sat well with me, right? Here's this extreme representation of violence and all the terrible things that humans can do to each other and often choose to do to each other. I could certainly understand aspects of forgiveness and the power of forgiveness, right? I mean, I was listening and paying attention, but it just seemed like the human beings, and I didn't have words for this at the time, but it seemed like so many human beings throughout human history just didn't get what Jesus was teaching, right? And then took it and changed it and made it into a form of power and leverage, power over other people, right? I mean, they did that with the Buddha. They've done that with many, many spiritual teachers, right? Where these teachers were teaching compassion and love and kindness and all these other virtues, right? And the humans, we humans can do quite a terrible job of putting that stuff into practice. And it seems like so many people still haven't learned that lesson.
Yeah, this is very profound for a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old to look at. Like you said, maybe at that time you didn't have words, but today, when you look back on all those experiences, it definitely shaped you to who you became. And as you were growing up, was the thought that human beings are not very kind somewhere making you conscious of being kind to other fellow human beings?
That was part of it. And it wasn't, and thank you for asking, because it wasn't that I felt that all or most human beings were unkind. It was just, I was understanding that there were, a small portion who weren't, often in positions of power, which made things tricky for all the other humans. And then a lot of other humans were raised in situations of trauma or danger or fear, right? So their unkindness, if you will, it was often a trauma-based response, right? Like I was starting to understand those things. So yeah, I was doing my best to be kind, right? Yeah, witnessing certain people around me, especially I have this memory of my stepfather when I was in high school, taking me to, we were going to help build a soup kitchen in New York City, right? On the Lower East Side of Manhattan, if that rings a bell for any of the listeners, where there's a lot of, at least at that time, there's a lot of drug use and a lot of people living on the margins of the human experience, and tough to do so in a city, right? Any city, I mean, any place for that matter, but cities are, I think, especially tough. So we drove out to Long Island, which is Eastern New York, and recovered wood, did it with several people, recovered wood from a barn that collapsed, brought it back and helped build the soup kitchen. And I remember seeing someone who was, I'm not sure if they were unhoused or, kind of living on the edge, a woman who at some point, was kind of in the mix of people, but, stepped over to the side and urinated on the ground, right? And that was the first time I went, whoa, somebody's urinating in public, like what does that mean? Um, that she doesn't have a place to go do that, or not an easy place to go do that. And that really obviously stuck with me. uh, that whole experience of here are a whole bunch of people who can help, and here are some people who need help, right? So that was a big one. And then back then, and maybe still, there was a radio station in New York called WBAI, and for lack of better terms, it was the progressive news station, well, news and music and other things. And they did a lot of, shall we say, truth telling of some really difficult situations. And it was the first time I had understood, like truly understood, some of the bad things that the US government had done. And there was an expose on Guatemala. And this, I guess this was Guatemala in the 80s. And I don't know if it was the US military or US contractors, but many bad things. And I remember like listening to this. And again, interestingly enough, this was my stepfather said, why don't you listen to this? And I just remember like listening and weeping because I had no idea that, I mean, maybe I knew peripherally. I mean, I knew that there was a Holocaust, right? But that was in the past, right? So it didn't quite compute until I heard this expose, like I said, and I think those two situations were probably the most galvanizing for me, at least at that stage in my life, where I knew that I wanted to help, and how can I, and not just be kind, but how can I actually help and serve and make things better for people, on whatever level. And I didn't quite have a vision yet, but the seed and the energy were there to do something.
This is interesting because you yourself said some time back that you didn't kind of fit in there and you didn't feel that you are part of it. And as you grow older, you see people in less privileged conditions and feel that you want to help. So at that time, what did your thought of yourself and where come in as to you? And how did you think you'd be in a position to help when you yourself did not fit in there?
That's a great question. Thank you. There were a couple of things. I had the opportunity in my high school to be what was called a peer group counselor, where it was myself and another counselor with a teacher and a couple of younger students. So we would meet, I don't know, it's a long time ago. We would meet once or twice a week and talk about stuff, right? Talk about the challenges that these younger people were facing in life, in school, that kind of thing. So, that was probably my first. That was probably my first practice of coaching. Was in that situation, and that was really, really helpful because outside of that, I was feeling, still having that feeling of being an outsider on some level, and I had many friends, and it wasn't that I was alone, right? But there was a loneliness, I guess, to my experience. And I was also in that situation where I was a very high achiever. I graduated seventh in my class in high school. So, lots of study and lots of homework and lots of activities and lots of advanced placement courses, a lot of college courses in high school, all these kinds of things. So I was, working like crazy, and like I had to prove myself. All this peer pressure around getting into Harvard, right, or other notable academic institutions. So all that's going on, and then somewhere in there, I mean, you're not going to be able to tell from my hair right now, but back then I had long hair, right? When I used to have hair, I had long hair. And it was such a problem for many years in the school because of the dress code, right? And the inconsistent application of the dress code, the fear and terror sometimes of the application of the dress code as well. I felt stuck in a lot of ways. Like I didn't quite know what to do with myself, what to do about that, right? It just felt like, oh, just, do the work and do the work and, get out at some point. There were other people in my high school when the heavy-handed stuff was happening, they left. They didn't stay. I remember not making that choice and feeling a lot of shame around that. Like shame of not standing up for myself, fear that I'm going to let people down, fear that I'm not going to get into a good school. And, what is that going to mean for my life? All these kinds of things. And just so much, societal pressure, like small microcosm of society, but societal pressure that was really not fun. As you might be able to tell, the more I felt constricted and the more injustice that I was experiencing or witnessing with other people, the more I wanted to help through that experience.
For me, what I'm not able to understand still about you, Ben, is you yourself were not finding you fit in. Okay. And you wanted to help those outside the privileged community.
Mhm.
So, what was your driving force? What did you think if you do, you would be happy? What was success to you at that point of time? And who were those who were pushing you to find who you can truly be?
Yeah, I mean, success was good grades and getting into, some sought after university.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was pretty much it. I mean, there was certainly, enjoying my friends on the weekends, things like that, but it was really around, this success, this external success. There were some special teachers in and around that. One was, or several of my creative writing teachers, right? Because there was always the assignments and the invitation to write and to journal and to explore through writing. I mean, I've been writing since I was 12, right? And have always loved it, still do it. That there was much more space and spaciousness in the space of writing, right? And a way to move things out of my head and out of my heart, right? And onto paper. So to be able to process my experience more directly, because I didn't discover meditation until my 30s, and I didn't really have tools to navigate. I mean, so few people had the tools at that point. Yeah, the writing teachers, and then I guess it was a religion teacher one year, but it wasn't really religion, the class. It was more like a bunch of teenagers hanging out with Brother Ron. So we would do all sorts of really interesting, and the only really way I can describe it is personal development activities, right? We would read, we would reflect, we would say positive things to and about each other. We would listen to music and kind of understand, glean the meaning from the music. So there was this really interesting experience in this class for a year where it was like this oasis in these 4 years of high school that really was, there was nothing like it. I think Brother Ron, I assume, was a hippie back in the day before he became a brother. Those people were great, and my mom and stepdad, they were super supportive and very loving, and my whole family was. There was that bit of, follow the rules, do the things that everybody else is doing, study hard, right? Don't mess around. So there was that, a great amount of love and support, right? And this is not being critical of them. They, doing the best they could at that point. But I could see that there was that something that wasn't quite complete, because I wasn't fully feeling that, hey, you can really be you, instead of you can only be you up to here, right? And then you can't be you because that might break the rules and cause problems.
Okay, so here I see a kid who is still trying to grapple with rules and still try to identify who he can be, lonely, for whom writing was something that was the way he got out his feelings. So, looking back, do you think writing was therapeutic for you, cathartic for you, or it was something that gave you a lot of peace because you said you were lonely? Were those times when you were writing where you truly connected to yourself that made it happy moments for you? How important was writing for you in putting your thoughts out there and turning you into the multiple award-winning writer that you are today?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Very, very important. There was certainly a level of peace and ease. There was probably, and thank you for the question, probably the most, or one of the places where I felt the most control, right? Because I was writing what I wanted to write in my journal or for an assignment. And I mean, when I had started writing was before high school, thanks to some wonderful teacher who made us keep journals. And I remember at 12 years old, and I was also an avid reader at that point. I mean, I still read voraciously. um, that I knew when I was 12 that I wanted to write a novel. Like I picked that up, and I'm not sure how or where. It's like, all right, I'm going to write a novel. And that certainly has been foundational. So I haven't written a novel yet. I've written other books, right? But the novel is still coming. Maybe next year, we'll see what happens.
In these multiple books that you have written, and all of them are very popular, award winning bestsellers, what was your first book? And consequently, what were the other books that you came up with? And when did your journey as a book coach happen?
Many answers to this. So my first book was called Marketing with a Heart, right? And kind of what it sounds like, the idea that marketing can be a form of service and a way to help people, right? If you have something that's going to help people, let them know, right? Get it into their hands. So Marketing with a Heart was my first one. Second one was called Influence with a Heart, about being a better leader and communicator by using more empathy and story and thought leadership. And then the third book was The Influence with a Heart Method. So it was about standing out as an expert by writing a book so you can help more people with your message. And then the fourth book, which was published earlier this year, I co-wrote with someone. It's called The Influencer's Formula. And it's the subtitle. I think it's How to Create a Global Thought Leadership Masterpiece with a Podcast or Book. Right. So this whole idea of standing out as an expert and making a difference with your message, and really stepping into the leadership role, whether it's official or not, but stepping into the leader that you are, being that person, inhabiting that space, because I think that's something that we all need to do and keep doing. And the how this all started is going to go back in time a little bit. So I visited India 2 months, 2 times in my life. Once for 2 months in the south, and the second time for 5 months in the north. And when I was there in the south for the 2 months, I was on a hike, and within a 72-hour period, I faced death like 4 times in a row. Right, on the way to the hike, my bus almost went off the cliff or off the mountain, literally almost off. And then on the hike, ended up having to run from a wildfire. Right, my guide turned to me and he said, "Run," and I didn't know why, and we ran, and found out it was a wildfire, and then encountered a poisonous snake, and then also encountered a mountain lion, all in this very, very short space. So the reason why I'm telling this story is because my gratitude for being alive was tremendous at that moment, or those moments, right, for making it through. And just the even more so, that galvanizing my purpose, right, wanting to help, wanting to make a bigger impact, just became so much more important. Oh my goodness, I'm alive, right? Like whatever I do for the rest of my life, I have to help, right? So that was one thing. And then second time I was in India, I got ready to do a long hike, a 9-day hike in the Himalayas this time. And I showed up to India with old boots. I didn't get new boots, which wasn't a good idea, because the backstory is that for about a decade and a half before that, I had done way too many drugs and partied way too much. And I think some of this was a function of feeling alone and feeling lonely and feeling out of place, right? So all these kinds of things. So finally stopped all of that, and I went back to India because I needed to get my head together. And I do this hike with the boots, and I ran around the town that I was in. We're up in Ladakh. Ran around the town saying, "Does anyone have a size 13 US shoe?" And they're like, "No, absolutely not," because I'm the tallest person around. So I end up getting the boots fixed, and in fixing the boots, there were 2 extra kind of bumps, pieces of fabric that made 2 very big blisters on my Achilles tendons. So for 9 days of hiking, for 6 or 8 hours a day, every single step was ow, 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 right? And the anger at myself and what an idiot you are, and how could you do all these things, and et cetera, et cetera, all sorts of chatter, right? All sorts of monkey mind. So day 5 or day 6 of this hike, I'm looking at the mountains around me, right up in the Himalayas. It's so beautiful, and everything is extra beautiful. And I'm looking around, I'm like, why is it so beautiful? Like, I'm not on drugs. Why is it so beautiful? And I realized, oh, for the first time in my life, I've actually been in the present moment for these last 5 days because of each of those painful footsteps, right? It was not what I would have chosen, but it brought me into that space. And I went, oh, this is what it means. This is why people are talking about the present moment and why it's so important. So this happens, and then 12 years later, right? Because sometimes it takes a minute to figure things out. 12 years later, I realized that experience, I understood the difference between pain and suffering, right? That pain is a part of our human experience, physical, mental pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain, right? But the suffering is what we add to it, right? And so much of the time that suffering is optional, right? So those 2 things were foundational ultimately in the book writing, because I became an entrepreneur. Somebody asked me to help them in their business, became an entrepreneur, and it took almost 10 years to figure out what I actually was doing, right? I had no business training, none of that stuff, right? So figuring things out. I wrote the first book, Marketing with a Heart, still figuring things out, doing public speaking, figuring things out. And then somebody reaches out to me, and I had just changed my business name on LinkedIn, right? Influence with a Heart. Somebody reaches out and she says, hey, we're an event planning company. We have a 2-day training coming up at Stanford University. There are this group of visiting business people from one company, about 130 people. They're going to be visiting Twitter and Google and LinkedIn and Facebook, and then they're going to come to Stanford for this training. Do you want to give the training? And I was like, oh my goodness, of course I want to give the training, right? So we sign the contract, figure out all the things. And I say to the event planner, and I had learned this from a business coach, I said, hey, I want to make this event really special for the audience and for your staff and everybody. I'm going to show up with autographed copies of my brand new book for everyone in the audience for free. And then I'll stay for some photos. She said, wow, that's amazing. Thank you. I said, you're welcome. I hung up the phone and I went, oh no, I have to write that book that I just promised. And from the promise to the event, I only had 6.5 weeks. Yes. So I had to write the book in 3 weeks, get it produced, show up with books. And it turned out the event went really well. The audience loved it. The event planning company hired me for several more speaking gigs. The audience was from Australia. They hired me to come speak in Sydney, Australia the next year. And then if we go back in time slightly, I got the book cover designed as I was frantically writing it. And I put it up on LinkedIn. I said, hooray, I'm so excited. My new book is coming soon. And somebody reached out to me, a different person, and said, hey, we just saw your book is coming. We're creating a mindfulness and empathy video game with a Fortune 100 company and MIT. It's going to be played by 20,000 people. Would you like to write the curriculum? And I said, of course I'd like to write the curriculum, right? And that turned into a 10-month consulting project with this Fortune 100 company. And that project happened before I even finished my book, or at least got started before I finished my book, right? So those two experiences, right, the Stanford talk and then the Fortune 100 company video game, I looked at those two situations and I went, wait a minute, I can teach people how to do that, right? I can teach them how to get their book done quickly, right? In as little as 5 weeks. That's my methodology. And then I can help them with the publishing. But first and foremost, I can show them how to get clients and strategic partners before the book is done by having conversations about the book. And that's how I created this business.
Oh my God. I always believe that life has bigger plans for you. So surrendering to life is the best way to live. And you are proof of that because when you put one thing together, just a thought, and in 6 weeks, Ben, all of us have books within us. All of us are storytellers. Our lives are worth reading and sharing. So, what does it take to put your thoughts into a book? What does it take? Because you had 6 weeks, you had to design a program to deliver for 2 days, and you were giving this as a freebie to every one of them who was coming in. So, this is so strategic because you already have books given away even before they were in the publishing house. So, what would you tell people, especially people like me, who are hesitating to take that first step to put thoughts into books, as to what is it that we need in order to get that plan out there?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So it's a couple of things. The first thing that I tell everybody is that you want to make sure that the book is going to work, right? So talk to your ideal clients about the book you're writing as you're writing it to understand what they need, how you can help them, what their challenges are, all that kind of stuff. Because if you write the book for your ideal clients, right, then because you've spoken to them, you know how to focus the book, you know the language to use, you know what stories to include, right? So you give yourself a tremendous leg up by understanding who the book is for. So that's one part of it. And then another part of it is to actually use a blueprint for the book. So I give all my clients an actual blueprint to put this here, put this here, put this here, put this here. And everybody's content is different, so everybody's book is different, but the architecture is the same, right? I say to my clients, I don't want you thinking about the logistics of a book, right? I just want you to focus on the content and focus on the people that you're serving. So talking to the clients, having a blueprint, having a method to follow, right? So you know how to turn your thoughts into words. And then I'm a big fan of dictation as part of the process for a couple of reasons. One is because you can move quickly with dictation. In 7 minutes, if you know what you're talking about, and right, in 7 minutes, you can have 1,200 words, right? And 1,200 words is 5% of a 25,000 word book, right? So dictation expedites the process. And I'd say even more importantly, dictation allows people not to get stuck on writing, right? Oh, I'm a good writer. I'm not a good writer. Oh, is this the right word? How do I say this? Is this the right punctuation? None of that, right? You're an expert in your stuff. Just speak and teach and capture that, right? And I say to people, don't just speak extemporaneously, right? That's not going to help, but follow the outline, and then, within each section of the book, follow talking points. Like give yourself talking points so you can speak through your ideas in a clear way for your reader, right? So putting all of those things together, then the book can be done in a very quick amount of time. And let me just repeat one thing here that's important. When you know who you're writing for, right, then you already know the kinds of things you want to teach. So then you just connect the dots, right? And you already know the stories you want to share, or at least some of them. So connect the dots, right? Use the ones that are most appropriate, that will help that person or help you make your point most effectively.
True, very true, and very beautifully put. Your company is called Influence with a Heart, which means it is a lot to do with emotions. But the way you speak and conceive the whole concept is very logical, which is with the brain. So, where do the heart and the brain meet in this journey?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I teach people something very important for the whole writing process, and it is smiling meditation. Right? I say to people, smile as much as you can throughout your day, because it will change your entire life, first and foremost. And especially when you're sitting down to do some research for the book, or you're getting ready to have a conversation with somebody about the book, and pretty much anytime you're sitting down to do anything, right? Close your eyes, smile, relax, and breathe, and connect to your heart, right? Connect to that feeling of love in your heart. And if the feeling is not so obvious right at the moment, imagine holding a puppy or holding a kitten in your arms and smiling at that little fuzzy being, right? That feeling of love. Pay attention to that and breathe with that for a couple of minutes, because the idea of connecting with the love here, you slow down, right? You become more present. And I like to say that you lighten your mind, right? Because a light mind is the right mind to write, right? Very, very important. And then when there's that lighter mind, it's easier to do the book stuff, right? The dictation, the research, the outline, whatever the person is working on. And when the difficulties happen, because the difficulties always happen with books, maybe there's procrastination or self-judgment or shame or worry, or what are people going to think about this, all that kind of stuff. Those distractions, those negative feelings, instead of getting involved with them and having them stop you, I just remind people, okay, just relax, let that go, smile, relax, breathe. And you might have to do that multiple times, but sooner or later, right? Sooner or later, that's going to change, right? Don't try to push it away. Don't try to force it away. Just let it be over here and let it work itself out, and keep lightening your mind, keep smiling, and then you can go back and get back to the book.
Yeah, easier said than done for sure, but that requires a lot of practice. I would like to take you slightly back on the book that came up in 6 weeks while you were designing a program for Stanford. Was the book in any way based on the design of what you were planning to deliver for 2 days in Stanford?
Yes, there was certainly a bit of overlap, because the training that I was doing at Stanford was around influence and leadership. And the book was called Influence with a Heart: How to Be a Better Communicator and Leader by Using More Empathy, Story, and Thought Leadership. So I taught all of those aspects on the weekend, as well as gave everybody a book.
That's beautiful. And talking about those reflections, Ben, everyone in the world globally went through something we all parallelly did called the pandemic. And in recent history, there was nothing like that that shook the world and brought it literally on its knees and made all of us get in touch with our heart. So all of us went into reflective spaces, paused a little to see what we can do to give back. And you were already somebody working with your heart. So, what were some of your reflections from the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. One of them was I understood more deeply how everybody in the world is my neighbor, right? Because it used to be that people were far away, and geographically they are, but with the pandemic, somebody next door was essentially as far away as somebody across the world. And I went, wow, everybody's a lot closer than I used to think they are. So that was a big one for me. Another one was uh, I was noticing from other people, a lot of folks reached out to me at that point to work on their books, right? Some of them because they quit jobs, some of them because their jobs quit them, some because they just knew that it was time, right? Like, what am I waiting for? I need to share this message. I need to tell my story. So it was really interesting, an interesting reminder of when, shall we say, when things are intense, that there's often a beautiful wake up call that happens. I didn't mention this before, but I was before the pandemic, several years before, I was a hospice volunteer for 3 years in San Francisco, and it was really, really interesting and powerful, of course, to sit with people who were dying, sit with some people as they transitioned, of course, but to really see over and over again, certain people were ready to die without regrets, and many people had a lot of regrets. So from that and then into the pandemic, it was just that continued or that deepening reflection of we regret what we don't do much more than if we do something and we fail or do it wrong, quote unquote fail. So it's important to do stuff, right? Don't wait, as they say.
Yeah, that's such a recurring thought all the time to most of us. And you've had clearly a very interesting journey. Are there some standout moments, milestones that when you look back on, there is a smile on your face and a gratitude in your heart?
Hmm. Yes, for sure. When I was 9 years old and my brother was born, and I found out that he was born, I was happy like I never was before. It was the first time that I cried from happiness. So that was a big one for me. Um, Another one was the first time I traveled on my own overseas. I went to Amsterdam and Paris, and I remember stepping out into Amsterdam and just going, wow, it's a whole new world, right? That opened up so much possibility. And then, gosh, after I did my first meditation retreat in India, I had never really done meditation. I had done a little bit, and then I jumped in and did a 10-day Vipassana retreat, right? And it was probably the hardest thing that I had ever done, but it was so rewarding and just opened up the doors to so many other things in my life. Yeah, gosh. And probably every time I enter a new country or a new city, and step out onto the street for the first time. Those are all really delightful moments for me.
And you visited India twice, you said, once completely for the south of India, the other time to the north. How would you describe your entire journey all through India, north and south? And what drew you to India? What is the most fascinating factor about India that you have taken back?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So my whole my whole journey, both trips, India. So India, I find to be 100% psychedelic 100% of the time,
Wow.
right? No drugs needed, right? Just there's so much smell and sound and sight and energy and spirit and all these things, and it's happening in a way that I've never experienced in any other country. Um, and so beautiful, so magical. Some of it difficult, right? Like many countries. But even in this vast, and I'm thinking right now of some of the cities that I was in, even in the kind of vast craziness, that there was still a kind of rhythm and a kind of dance to all of it, which was amazing. Like, I don't know how this is all working, and it's working somehow. Right? So psychedelic, I think, is the single word. And yeah, I loved it. I used to work for I used to work for magazines many years ago, before I became an entrepreneur. Some big US titles, and helped launch the biggest magazine in the world, at least at that time. And one of the magazines was a travel magazine, Condé Nast Traveler. And I was reading a bit about India, and I was like, "Ooh, that sounds really good." Right, the first time I went, and I was still partying quite a bit, and I had heard about like places like Goa, where I could go party on the beach. Right, so there was that draw and that attraction. But what happened on the first trip was that I really discovered yoga and discovered Reiki, which were both transformative for me. And then after my first India trip, I was not quite done with drugs and partying. So I was on my last leg. And if you've heard the term rock bottom, right? Like, I hit rock bottom on my journey. And I remember I remember stepping outside of my workplace in San Francisco, and looking up at the sky and just saying, I want to be free. Right? It just made that proclamation. And 5 months later, I was back in India. Like, it just seemed like the right thing to do. So I went back, and my first month in Ladakh, I did a volunteer program. I lived with a family. Excuse me. I helped them farm barley, which is really, really interesting. And then did my Vipassana retreat. I taught English for a little while in McLeod Ganj to Tibetan refugees, and walked around, spent some time in Varanasi, and got to Varanasi is amazing, but I got to also experience the burning ghats, and that was a very another powerful lesson about life and death and the transience of life, and that yeah, we don't know. None of us know how long we have. I mean, we think and hope and assume that it'll be a long, happy, healthy life, and might not make it to tomorrow. And I don't say that with there's nothing bad in what I'm saying, right? I'm not saying that sadly. It's just, okay, here's a great reason to live, right now.
That's so true. And three life lessons, Ben, as we move towards the end of the conversation, three life lessons that you'd like to leave us with.
Wow, thank you. I have them written down, which is why I'm looking down here. The first one is, if you do nothing else, meditate. Very, very important. It will change everything in your life and your experience. Another one is killing people and killing animals is wrong, period. No, there's no way around that. And no matter how bad things get for you, you can always help someone else because for someone else, things are worse than they are for you. So go help some people.
And that's what you've been constantly doing, a positive approach to life. I love the fact that how much you took to journaling, which has helped you become who you are today. And the beautiful way in which you simply explained what life teaches all of us, but very few amongst us become aware to that. A fascinating life indeed, Ben. And it has been such a pleasure hosting you on You and I with Rashmi Shetty, an honor having you here. And thank you so much for sharing your journey so authentically and giving us so many nuggets to take back and think on how to live our life more mindfully. God bless you, and thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Rashmi. It's been a pleasure.
With that, we complete this episode of You and I with Rashmi Shetty. Do let us know if you know inspirational people whose story needs to be heard. You can write in at rashmi.thirdeye@gmail.com. That is rashmi.thirdeye@gmail.com.